The moment you realized you could not unsee it anymore, your body reacted before your mind did. A tightening somewhere between the ribs. A slight delay in your response when someone spoke. A pause that did not exist yesterday. You were already reading the room while pretending to listen. That is how it always begins. Where are you watching from right now? Some answers land flat. Others create a strange internal echo. That difference matters more than people think. Something has already happened by the time you are aware of it. That is the part no one prepares you for. Awareness is not an achievement you earn later. It arrives early. Too early. It comes before status. Before clarity. Before permission. It comes when you still do not have the language to explain why you feel older than your age, or why you notice motives before outcomes. You learn to read people before you learn to trust them. Not because you wanted power. Not because you were suspicious by nature. It happened because your system required it. You had to understand tone shifts. Micro hesitations. The way someone's eyes moved when they said yes, but meant something else entirely. You noticed patterns before you understood what patterns were. And if you are carrying the letter M and the crescent curve into the palms of your hands, this was not accidental. This channel is not built for everyone scrolling past. It exists as an orientation tool for a very specific group. Those who were wired for perception before accomplishment. Those who were trained internally long before anything external made sense. You were not late to your life. You were early to its structure. Most people are allowed to move blindly for a while, to chase, to collide, to learn through damage. You were not given that luxury. You were taught to sense first, to measure the emotional temperature of a space before deciding where to stand. To detect inconsistencies in people who had not yet exposed themselves. This did not make you confident. It made you quiet. There is a reason you often felt like you were holding information you did not ask for. Emotional data, intent, unspoken trajectories. You could walk into a room and feel where tension would emerge later. You knew who would disappoint who before it happened, not as prophecy. As pattern recognition. That awareness did not make you successful right away. In fact, it often delayed visible progress. Because when you see too much too early, you hesitate. You question. You wait. Others rush forward while you stand still, watching consequences form in slow motion. People mistook that for fear. It was not fear. It was calibration. Your system was not designed to achieve first. It was designed to understand. And understanding is heavier than ambition. It takes up more internal space. It forces you to carry complexity, while others move freely with simpler narratives. If this does not resonate, let it pass. Truly, this is not meant to convince. It is meant to recognize. But if you have always known when someone was lying before they finished their sentence, if you have felt the emotional undercurrent of conversations more clearly than the words themselves, if you have watched people succeed quickly only to later understand why their success could not last, then you know what I am pointing at. You were trained to see through people before guiding them. That training was not gentle. It often arrived through confusion. Through situations where you were expected to react like everyone else, but could not. Through moments where your intuition spoke louder than social instruction. You learned restraint. You learned silence. You learned when not to speak. And that silence was not weakness. It was containment. The world rewards visible motion. It does not reward internal readiness. So you grew up feeling out of sync. Too perceptive for your age. Too cautious for your environment. Too aware to be impulsive. Too restrained to be celebrated. That does something to a person. It can create self-doubt if you are not careful. It can make you question why others move ahead while you remain suspended. It can tempt you to force achievement just to quiet the discomfort of being unseen. But forcing achievement before alignment breaks people like you. Because awareness came first for a reason. You were not meant to lead with action. You were meant to lead with accuracy. To understand the terrain before stepping into it. To feel the architecture of situations before occupying them. That is why rushed paths always felt wrong to you. Even when they looked impressive. Even when they promised validation. Something in your body resisted. Not anxiety. Not laziness. A refusal to build on unstable ground. Your hands carry marks that mirror this sequence. The letter M does not represent mastery achieved. It represents capacity perceived. The crescent does not announce completion. It signals a phase of becoming that requires patience. People misunderstand this and try to turn it into mysticism or superiority. That misses the point entirely. This is not about being special. It is about being configured differently. Awareness before achievement means you are tasked with responsibility before recognition. You are expected to hold discernment without applause. To delay gratification not because you lack desire, but because your system rejects false timelines. That is why you often felt like you were waiting for something you could not name. Not an opportunity. Not a person. Not a moment. You were waiting for internal permission. For the point where your understanding and your action finally aligned. Until then, everything felt premature. Relationships felt misaligned because you could see where they were headed long before they arrived there. Jobs felt hollow because you sensed their ceiling before reaching it. Environments felt draining because you absorbed more information than you could process consciously. You were not broken. You were overaware in a world that values speed over depth. This channel does not exist to entertain or distract. It exists to help orient those who have been quietly preparing without a map. Those who carry internal clarity that arrived too early and external achievement that arrived too late. If you have ever wondered why you feel capable but invisible, why you understand dynamics others miss, but struggle to move forward in conventional ways, why your growth feels internal long before it becomes visible, then you are not alone in this. And no, this does not mean you will never achieve. It means when you do, it will be anchored, sustainable, real, not borrowed from momentum that was never yours. Leadership does not begin with followers. It begins with perception, with the ability to read before directing, to listen before instructing, to wait before acting. You were given that sequence intentionally. That is why pressure always felt different to you. Why expectations weighed heavier. Why you felt accountable for outcomes you did not create. You sensed responsibility before authority. Most people are handed authority and then learn responsibility through failure. You were handed responsibility internally and had to wait for authority to catch up. That waiting period is the hardest part. It tests your patience, your self-trust, your willingness to remain unseen while knowing you could intervene. It tempts you to speak when silence would protect you. It challenges you to stay grounded when recognition is delayed. But this period is not wasted time. It is integration. You are learning how to hold clarity without arrogance, how to maintain awareness without becoming cynical, how to prepare for influence without needing to dominate. That balance is rare, and it cannot be rushed. If you are still listening, take a moment and notice something. The way your body feels when these words land. Not emotionally, physically. There is information there. Subtle but precise. That sensation is your confirmation, not belief. Recognition. This is not the part where everything resolves. It is the part where you realize you were never behind. You were positioned. Before we move any further, there is something simple I want to say without turning it into a performance. If this space has helped you name things you have carried silently for years, staying connected matters. Not for numbers. Not for visibility. but because this channel only works if the people it was built for remain in the room. Subscribe if that feels aligned, not because you were told to, but because you recognize the tone of what is being said here. And if there is a subject you keep circling internally, something you feel should be addressed, but rarely see spoken clearly, leave it in the comments. Not as a request, as a signal. I read those signals more carefully than you might expect. Now, let's continue. Awareness arriving before achievement creates a specific tension that almost no one talks about honestly. It is the tension of knowing without being able to act, of sensing direction while lacking position, of holding insight in environments that reward execution over understanding. This tension shapes you quietly. It teaches you restraint, yes, but it also teaches you discernment. You learn when to stay out of situations not because you are incapable, but because you see where they lead. You learn how to sit with incomplete outcomes without rushing to resolve them. You learn how to watch momentum form and decay in others while remaining internally still. That stillness is often misread. People assume you are passive, or indecisive, or uninterested. They do not realize you are tracking multiple layers at once. Emotional dynamics, power shifts, future consequences that have not yet surfaced. You are not slower. You are wider. This is where many people like you make a mistake. They try to compress themselves to fit faster. Timelines. They force action to relieve internal pressure. They step into roles that look correct but feel hollow. They accept paths that promise validation instead of alignment. And the body reacts immediately. Tightness, fatigue, a sense of internal friction that no amount of motivation fixes. Because awareness does not like being ignored. It does not punish. It resists. You have likely experienced this resistance as exhaustion that does not match your workload, or as a recurring sense that you are misusing your energy, or as a low-level dissatisfaction even when things appear to be working. That is not ingratitude. That is misplacement. When awareness comes first, achievement must be precise. Not impressive. Not loud. Precise. Otherwise, it drains you instead of expanding you. This is why imitation never worked for you. You could see the mechanics behind other people's success too clearly to replicate them blindly. You noticed the trade-offs, the compromises, the emotional costs they paid quietly, and something in you refused to pay those costs. So you waited. Waiting is not idle. It is active restraint. It requires strength to hold capacity without releasing it prematurely, to carry readiness without forcing opportunity. Most people cannot do this. They leak energy through constant motion. You learned containment early. The marks on your hands are not symbols of destiny in a theatrical sense. They reflect a pattern of internal sequencing, perception, calibration, then expression. Never the other way around. That is why leadership, when it finally arrives for you, feels different. It is quieter, less performative, more grounded. You do not need to convince people. They feel steadier around you without knowing why. You have probably noticed this already in small ways. People confiding things they did not plan to say. Seeking your input without asking directly. Feeling calmer after conversations with you even when nothing was solved. That is not charisma. It is coherence. Coherence is the byproduct of awareness that has been integrated rather than rushed. It is what happens when you do not weaponize your perception, when you let understanding mature instead of turning it into control. This is important because people who see early are tempted to manipulate, to use insight as leverage, to steer outcomes quietly. Some do, and they achieve quickly, but they burn out just as fast. You were not wired for that. Your awareness was meant to support others, not dominate them, to stabilize systems, not exploit them. to guide gently rather than command loudly. That does not mean you avoid influence. It means influence flows through you differently. This also explains why you struggled with authority figures who lacked self-awareness. You could see their blind spots too clearly to respect them unconditionally. You sensed when power was misaligned with understanding, and that friction made conventional hierarchies uncomfortable for you. You learned to navigate them carefully, sometimes too carefully, choosing survival over expression until you understood the landscape fully. This survival phase often lasts longer for people like you, not because you are weak, but because you are thorough. You do not want partial victories. You want structural integrity. Here is something rarely said out loud. Awareness before achievement often feels like loneliness before belonging, because few people can meet you where you are internally before you are visible externally. They relate to roles, titles, outputs. You are still assembling those while already carrying depth. That gap can be painful. It can make you question whether you are actually progressing, whether your internal work counts, whether you are missing something obvious everyone else understands. You are not missing anything. You are just early in a different dimension. The moment achievement finally aligns for you, it does not feel like arrival. It feels like relief, like your internal and external worlds finally stopped arguing. Until then, patience is not optional. It is protective. If any of this resonates, take a moment to reflect privately, not on what you want to become, on what you already understand but have not yet expressed. That inventory matters more than goals right now. And if there is a theme here you want explored further, leadership, timing, restraint, the cost of early perception, signal it. Quietly or openly. Either way, it is received. There is a very specific moment when awareness starts asking for movement. Not loudly, not urgently. It does not shout or panic. It presents itself as a subtle internal pressure, like something inside you shifting weight, testing balance. You feel it when staying still begins to cost more than moving forward. Not externally, internally. This is where many people misunderstand you. They think action comes from confidence, or ambition, or clarity. For you, action comes from saturation, from the point where observation has done all it can do and begins to turn inward, demanding expression so it does not calcify. You have likely felt this as restlessness that does not want distraction, as boredom that is not solved by novelty, as an urge to reorganize your life without knowing exactly what needs to change. That is not impatience. That is awareness completing its first cycle. Until this point, your perception has been mostly receptive. You absorbed. You tracked. You integrated. You learned how systems behave under stress, how people reveal themselves over time, how intentions drift when unsupported by structure. Now something else starts to happen. You begin to notice that your silence has weight, not the kind that protects you, the kind that withholds something necessary. There is a difference. Early on, silence kept you safe. It allowed you to observe without warning others. It gave you space to understand without interference. But eventually, silence becomes distortion, because what you see is meant to inform action, not remain sealed inside you. This is where discernment becomes responsibility, and responsibility is uncomfortable, because it means choosing when to intervene, when to speak, when to step into visibility, knowing you will be misunderstood at first. You cannot wait for perfect conditions. You cannot wait for certainty to become consensus. You move when internal alignment outweighs external readiness. That moment feels lonely, because you will not be joined immediately. People only recognize leadership after it stabilizes outcomes. Before that, it looks like disruption, or overthinking, or unnecessary complexity. You have probably already experienced this on a smaller scale. offering insight that was ignored, only to be proven accurate later, suggesting caution that was dismissed, then regretted, holding back from saying "I told you so," because it was never about being right. It was about preventing damage. This creates a strange relationship with timing. You learn that being early feels worse than being wrong. And yet you keep choosing early anyway, because something in you refuses to let misalignment pass quietly. This is not heroism. It is compulsion. Awareness does not tolerate stagnation forever. If you try to suppress it indefinitely, it turns inward. It manifests as self-criticism, as doubt, as a sense that you are failing to live up to something you cannot explain. Many people mislabel this as lack of purpose. It is not lack. It is pressure without direction. Direction does not arrive as a map. It arrives as constraint, as clarity around what you can no longer do, where you can no longer stay, which roles you can no longer perform convincingly. You begin eliminating paths rather than choosing them. That is how movement starts for you. Not through expansion, but through refusal. You stop tolerating environments that dull you. You disengage from dynamics that require you to shrink. You step away from narratives that do not account for complexity. This is not withdrawal. It is alignment. From the outside, it can look like regression. Like you are stepping back, slowing down, simplifying too much. Internally, something else is happening. Your awareness is condensing. Scattered perception becomes focused insight. Observation becomes synthesis. Understanding begins to demand application. This is the stage where people either break themselves or finally trust their internal sequencing. Breaking happens when you try to perform action without honoring perception. When you rush expression without respecting the depth you carry. When you copy visible leaders instead of embodying your own rhythm. Trusting happens when you allow your movement to look unconventional. When you accept that your pace will confuse others. When you choose coherence over applause. The letter M on your palms does not indicate multiplicity. It indicates convergence. Multiple lines meeting at a point. Awareness folding into intention. Intention preparing to become form. The crescent is not an ornament. It marks incompletion that is intentional. A phase that must not be rushed or skipped. You are not meant to burst onto the scene fully formed. You are meant to enter gradually, adjusting the environment as you go. Stabilizing before expanding. This is why leadership feels heavy to you even before it arrives. You sense the weight of influence before holding it. You consider consequences before enjoying authority. That consideration is your safeguard. It prevents you from becoming reactive, from confusing control with guidance, from mistaking visibility for impact. When action finally begins to align for you, it does not feel exhilarating. It feels grounded, almost anticlimactic, like stepping into something you have already rehearsed internally 1,000 times. And that is exactly what it is. You have been practicing quietly, through observation, through restraint, through choosing not to act when others would, through listening when speaking would have been easier. Now the question is not whether you are ready. The question is whether you will allow readiness to look the way it naturally does for you. Not loud, not fast, not dramatic, precise. There is more to say here, but the next part changes tone. It moves from internal shifts into external consequences, into what happens when your awareness begins altering systems around you, not just yourself. When awareness finally begins to change the world around you, it does not announce itself. It alters the temperature of rooms before it alters outcomes. Conversations slow down slightly when you enter. People recalibrate their words without knowing why. Decisions hesitate in your presence, not because you demand control, but because clarity has weight. This is the part no one prepared you for. You expect resistance to come from opposition, from conflict, from disagreement. Instead, it comes from subtle dependence. People begin to lean on you emotionally, cognitively, energetically. They sense stability and want proximity to it. They seek reassurance without asking, guidance without framing it as such. And if you are not careful, you will carry more than you are meant to. Early awareness often leads to unspoken leadership. You become a reference point before you choose to be, a regulator before you accept the role. Others outsource their uncertainty to your calm, their confusion to your clarity. That can feel flattering at first. Then it becomes heavy, because awareness that changes systems must learn boundaries, or it dissolves into exhaustion. You are not here to absorb chaos indefinitely. You are here to influence structure. There is a difference. This is where many people like you quietly disappear for a while. They withdraw not out of fear, but out of necessity. They step back to recalibrate, to distinguish between what they are meant to carry and what they have simply been handed. If you have done this, or feel the pull to do it now, there is nothing wrong with you. This is not retreat. It is refinement. Influence without containment is dangerous. It spreads too thin. It blurs intent. You were never meant to be everywhere. You were meant to be precise. As your awareness stabilizes externally, something else begins to shift internally. The need to prove dissolves. The urge to convince fades. You stop trying to translate your perception into language everyone can understand. Not because you are giving up, because you realize understanding is not transferable on demand. People only hear what they are ready to hold. You learn to speak less, but more accurately. You choose moments instead of volume, timing instead of force. This is when your presence becomes directional rather than reactive. You stop responding to noise. You start responding to signal. And here is the quiet truth beneath all of this. Achievement, when it finally arrives for you, is not the climax. It is the confirmation. It shows up as alignment between what you see, what you do, and what the world reflects back to you. Not perfectly, not permanently, but enough to know you are no longer misusing yourself. That is the relief you have been waiting for. Not success as applause. Success as coherence. You may notice that what you build at this stage does not look like what others build. It may be smaller, or slower, or less obvious, but it holds. It does not collapse under pressure. It does not require constant maintenance through performance. It breathes, and that breathing allows others to breathe around you. This is how systems change quietly, not through disruption alone, but through stabilization, through introducing a rhythm that others unconsciously sync to. If you are listening to this and recognizing yourself, understand something clearly. You were never meant to rush into visibility without structure. You were never meant to sacrifice awareness for speed. Your sequencing was intentional. Perception first, integration second, expression third. Many people never reach the third stage because they confuse motion with movement. You did not. That patience will serve you now. This channel exists because people like you rarely find mirrors that reflect internal truth without distortion. It is not here to inflate identity or create hierarchy. It is here to offer orientation when old maps stop working. If being here has helped you feel less isolated in how you experience the world, stay connected. Not as a follower, as a participant in a shared frequency of understanding. Subscribe if that choice feels honest to you. And if you sense there are conversations that need to happen, ideas that have been hovering at the edge of your awareness, bring them into the space. Quietly, thoughtfully. This community grows through recognition, not recruitment.